She boarded as just another passenger minutes later. She was flying a failing plane while even the pilots watched in awe. Clara Jennings sat quietly near the window, her hands resting on her lap, fingers nervously playing with a small silver pin shaped like a pair of wings. It was old, a little worn, but polished. It had belonged to her father, a retired Air Force pilot who had once been her hero and inspiration. She had almost followed in his footsteps, but life had taken a different turn. Today, she was just a regular passenger on a small commercial flight from Denver to Seattle. She wasn't looking for adventure, excitement, or anything special. All she wanted was to get to her business meeting, present a marketing pitch, and go home. She didn't know that within the next few hours her life would change forever, and not just hers, but the lives of every person on board. The plane was small, only 12 seats. It wasn't one of those big commercial jets that everyone was used to. This one felt personal, almost like a flying minivan. There were only 2 flight attendants and a single pilot along with a co-pilot. Clara had chosen seat 30HE, always liked being close to the window. Watching the sky had once been her favorite thing, and now it brought back memories she didn't want to remember. Memories of the day she had dropped out of flight school, of the simulation that had gone wrong, the panic, the fear, the guilt. She hadn't flown a plane since. She had promised herself she never would again. As the passengers boarded and took their seats, Clara tried to focus on her tablet. She opened her notes, rereading the slides she had prepared. It was just a job, just another city, just another meeting. The engine started to hum, and the plane rolled toward the runway. The vibrations under her seat made her stomach flip just a little. The moment the wheels left the ground, she closed her eyes for a second. Her breath hitched. Then she opened them and reminded herself this was normal. Safe. She had done this 100 times. The flight took off smoothly. The sky was clear, blue, and endless. Below them, the landscape changed from flat fields to rocky hills, and soon they were flying over stretches of green forest. The cabin was calm. Some passengers were already sleeping. Young couples sat behind Clara, whispering to each other and laughing. A businessman across the aisle had already loosened his tie and opened a thick book. The flight attendant walked slowly through the aisle, offering drinks with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clara refused a drink and leaned her head against the window, watching the clouds. About halfway through the flight, something strange happened. It was small at first, a sudden jolt, the kind you feel during turbulence. But this one didn't feel like the normal bumps in the air. It felt sharper, louder, and it didn't stop. A strange humming sound followed, like a machine working too hard. Then came the loud bang. The entire plane shook. Passengers gasped. Some cried out. Clara's eyes flew open and her body tensed. Her heart pounded in her chest as the seatbelt sin flashed above her. The plane dipped suddenly, sending a tray of drinks flying down the aisle. The flight attendant dropped to her knees to grab a handrail. Clara looked out the window, her blood going cold. One of the engines was on fire. Flames danced along the wing, dark smoke trailing behind them like a ribbon in the sky. People began to panic. One man stood up, yelling. The flight attendant shouted at him to sit. Another woman screamed, "What's happening?" There was no answer, no announcement from the cockpit. The door remained shut. Clara's hands gripped the armrests. She tried to calm herself. She had learned about engine fires during training. She remembered the steps: cut fuel, feather the prop, prepare for emergency descent. But that was long ago. That was someone else's life. Suddenly, the co-pilot stumbled. Out of the cockpit, his forehead was bleeding. He looked dazed, barely able to stand. The flight attendant rushed to him and helped him to his seat. Clara watched as he struggled to speak. "He's alone now." "The pilot," he muttered, pointing toward the cockpit. "He needs help." Time seemed to slow. Clara looked at the man, then at the door to the cockpit. Her legs felt like stone. Her throat went dry. The flight attendant looked around desperately. "Is anyone here a doctor? A nurse? A pilot?" she called out. No one answered. Clara's heart raced. Her palms were sweating. She felt something rising inside her: fear. guilt, and something else. Responsibility. She looked down at the silver pin in her hand, still resting in her lap. Her father's wings. She didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet. Then the co-pilot turned to her. His eyes met hers, as if he saw something in her face. Maybe recognition? You? He whispered. You're not just a passenger. Clara looked away. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard him. But the truth was screaming inside her head. She did know what was happening. She could help. If only she weren't so afraid. The flight attendant was staring at her now, too. Do you know how to fly? She asked. Please, he can't do it alone. Clara shook her head. I'm not qualified. I didn't finish. I'm not a real pilot, but the flight attendant didn't care. You're the closest thing we have. Clara stood up. Her legs trembled. She took a deep breath and stepped toward the cockpit door. Every step felt heavy. Every memory came. Back in waves of time, she lost control in a simulator, the yelling instructor. The flashing red lights, her tear-streaked face as she walked out of the training center forever. She pushed open the cockpit door inside. The pilot sat slumped. In the chair, one hand clutching the controls, the other trying to work the radio. Sweat covered his face. He looked up as Clara entered. Who are you? He asked. I'm just someone who learned a long time ago. I never finished training, but I know this plane. I studied this exact model. I might be able to help. The pilot looked at her, doubtful but desperate. Fine, sit. Clara slid into the co-pilot's seat. Her hands hovered over the controls. It felt so strange, familiar but distant. Not like meeting an old friend you had left behind. The dials spun, the warning lights blinked. The engine fire had caused serious damage. The instruments were unreliable. The yoke was stiff. The plane was dropping altitude slowly, too slowly to be safe. Clara began scanning the systems. Her hands started to move, adjusting knobs, checking fuel levels, switching to backup gauges. She spoke to the pilot in a calm voice, asking about the last readings, how long the engine had been burning, what controls still worked. You sure you can do this? He asked. No, Clara said honestly, but I'm going to try. Outside. The cockpit window, the mountains were getting closer. Clock was ticking. In the cabin, passengers were terrified. Some were praying, some were holding hands. The young couple behind Clara's seat held each other tightly, whispering things they thought might be their last words. The businessman clutched his book like it was a life jacket. Flight attendant moved through the cabin, telling people to remain calm. But her own hands were shaking. No one knew that the quiet woman from seat 3A was now in the cockpit fighting. To keep them alive, Clara worked quickly, listening to the pilot's instructions, but also relying on her memory. She remembered her father's stories. She remembered the emergency drills. She remembered the joy of flying before fear took it away. Now, that same fear was pushing her forward. The pilot tried to reach ground control, but the signal was weak. Clara suggested switching frequencies, and they finally got through to an air traffic controller who sounded shocked to learn that a passenger was co-piloting. But there was no time for disbelief. She's all we've got, the pilot said, and she knows what she's doing. Clara adjusted the flaps, checked the speed, and helped stabilize the descent. Now, the plane was steady. Wasn't out, and the longer they stayed in the air, the greater the risk of full engine failure. Clara glanced at the pilot. He looked tired, worn out. I can take it for a while, she said. He hesitated, then nodded. All yours. The yoke. And just like that, she was flying again. Not in a simulator. Not in a classroom. In the sky. With real lives on the line, as she guided the plane through the clouds, her fear melted into focus. The world outside was quiet. Just wind, sky, and the low hum of an engine struggling to hold on. Clara Jennings was no longer just a passenger, and neither the pilot, nor anyone else on board, knew just how much they would soon owe her. Clara's hands were tight on the controls, her heart still racing as she tried to keep the small aircraft steady. The cockpit was hot and filled with blinking lights, buzzing alarms, and the sharp smell of burning wires. Her mind was moving fast, faster than it had in years. But under all the pressure, a strange calm had started to settle inside her. It wasn't the calm of someone who wasn't afraid. It was the calm of someone who had no choice but to act. The pilot beside her, Captain Reyes, was pale, his uniform stained with sweat. He had been flying for 30 years and had never seen a failure like this one. Right engine was still on fire, and the smoke had begun to sneak through the small cracks of the cockpit door. One of the control panels had short-circuited, and his co-pilot, now unconscious and strapped in a seat just behind them, couldn't help. He looked at Clara, confused but grateful, trying to understand who she was. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked her, his voice weak. Clara didn't answer right away. She was adjusting the trim, trying to balance the aircraft. It was dipping to the right too hard. She was using muscle strength and memory together. It's working through problems she hadn't faced in years. "I was in flight school," she said finally. "A long time ago, I dropped out." Captain Reyes stared at her. "You dropped out? Why?" Clara bit her lip. She didn't want to talk about the past. Not now. Not while their lives depended on what she remembered. Not what she failed. "It doesn't matter. I studied this aircraft model. I trained for emergencies like this. Just let me help." The captain nodded. "Be my co-pilot, then." That one sentence shook her more than the turbulence ever could. Her hands gripped the yoke harder. A co-pilot, a title she had once dreamed of. And now, in the middle of a nightmare, it was real again. Outside the cockpit window, the blue sky was slowly changing. The horizon ahead showed tall green mountains, their peaks sharp like knives. Clara checked the altitude. They were too low. The engine fire was making them descend faster than expected. The plane wasn't just damaged, it was dying. She looked. At the controls, half of the systems were failing. The fuel was dropping too fast. The right engine needed to be shut off completely to stop the fire from spreading. She looked at Captain Reyes. "If we don't shut it down now, the wing could go," she said quietly. He hesitated. Shutting it down would mean no chance of restart. No second option. But he trusted her now. He nodded once. Clara moved fast. Her fingers flipped switches in a sequence she hadn't used since her training days. The engine coughed once, then went silent. The fire began to die down, though the wing was scorched. They had one engine left. That meant slower flying, harder turns, and less time. Back in the cabin, panic was growing. People could feel the drop. In altitude, they could feel the turns weren't smooth. They had seen the fire outside their windows, and now there was silence from the front. No announcements. No explanation. Just fear. The flight attendant moved down the aisle, trying to calm people. She avoided looking at the injured co-pilot, even though his head was bleeding and he was barely awake. She had seen Clara go into the cockpit, but she still didn't know who Clara was, or why she hadn't come back out. One woman stood up. "What's happening? Is the pilot okay? Where's the other one?" she asked loudly. The flight attendant didn't know what to say. "The captain is still in control," she said carefully. "Someone is helping him." "Who?" the woman demanded. "A passenger," the attendant answered. The cabin filled with worried voices. "A passenger." "What do you mean a passenger? Who is she? Is she even trained?" "She's doing her best," the attendant said. "Please stay calm." Inside the cockpit, Clara was talking to air traffic control. The signal was weak, but she managed to get through to a calm voice on the other end. The controller's tone changed when he realized what was happening, that the co-pilot was unconscious and a former flight student was helping land a crippled plane. "You're not certified?" the controller asked. "No," Clara said. "But I know what I'm doing. I trained on this plane." "Copy that," the controller replied. "Let's get you down safe. We'll assist in any way we can." They talked about emergency options. Nearest airports, long stretches of road. The plane was still flying, but not well. Clara kept looking at the map screen. It blinked with warnings. But she focused on one thing: a highway cutting through the trees, long and mostly flat. An emergency landing there might be possible, but Captain Reyes shook his head. "That's risky. It's narrow. There are cars. Clara looked him straight in the eye. It's that or the mountains. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. Fine. You lead the approach. I'll manage the systems. Clara's heart jumped. She had been put in charge. She was flying this plane. She adjusted their course, guiding the plane gently toward the highway. The controls were stiff, but she had found a rhythm. Her body remembered this. Her hands moved without thinking, checking gauges, adjusting angles. Still, every second felt heavy. She couldn't make a mistake. The flight controller came back on. We've contacted state police. They're clearing a section of highway. But you only have one shot. It's not long enough for a second pass. Clara responded, understood. In the cabin, the passengers began to feel the turns. The sudden drop, the weight of silence. One man started crying. A teenager clutched a stuffed animal, rocking back and forth. Everyone felt something was wrong, very wrong. But they didn't. No, the person flying the plane wasn't even a certified pilot. The young couple behind Clara's seat held each other tighter. The businessman was no longer reading. The flight attendant made a final announcement. We're preparing for an emergency landing. Please stay in your seats. Brace position. Trust the crew. But Clara wasn't the crew. She was just a woman in seat 3A who had remembered how to fly as they neared the highway. She could see the flashing lights of police cars below. The road looked narrow, like a line drawn by a pencil. It had bends. It had signs. It wasn't made for landing aircraft. But it was their only hope. Clara began her descent. Slowly, carefully, she adjusted the flaps, spoke calmly to the pilot. They worked together now, two people who barely knew each other, but whose lives were completely connected. The radio crackled. Winds calm, highways clear. Your go for landing, Clara said. Copy that. She lowered the landing. Gear, the wheels groaned into position. One gear stuck slightly. The left wheel clicked in late, making her heart skip a beat. But it held. The nose dipped. The plane dropped lower. Reyes was watching her now, not the controls. Not the road. He was watching a woman who had once quit because she was afraid. A woman who now held the lives of 12 passengers in her hands. Whatever happens, he said quietly. You did good, Jennings. She didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the highway. They were almost there. As the wheels neared the asphalt, she pulled back just a little. Just like she had been taught. Not too hard. Not too soft. The trees on either side rushed past like shadows. A bump. The wheels touched down. A screech of rubber. The plane bounced once. Screams in the cabin. The wing clipped a sign. Metal sparked. But Clara kept it straight. She fought the yoke. She braked gently, slowly. Not too fast or the plane would spin. The plane skidded. Forward, forward, forward until finally it stopped. The silence after the screech was unreal. It was so quiet it felt like time had stopped. Then came the cries. Not of fear, but of relief. The passengers were alive. Every one of them. No broken bones, no crash, just disbelief. In the cockpit, Clara sat frozen, hands still on the controls. Captain, Reyes smiled at her. You flew it. She shook her head. You did it. No, he said softly, you did. Outside, emergency crews rushed toward them. The door opened. The passengers began to exit. Some hugged the flight attendant. We're crying. No one knew what had really happened yet. But the story was already beginning to spread. A woman, just a passenger, had landed a plane when the professionals couldn't. And in the cockpit, Clara finally let go of the yoke. Her hands were shaken. But not from fear this time. From something. Else the memory of the girl she had once been, the one who had quit, who had given up, was fading. Now she was someone else. Someone who had remembered how to fly. The plane was in the air, but barely. The right engine had been shut down, and the left one was working too hard, groaning every time Clara adjusted the controls. Smoke still lingered near the wing, and sparks had shot out just minutes before. Inside the cockpit, Clara kept her eyes on the instruments, though many of them were flashing or completely dead. She was now completely in charge of flying the aircraft. With Captain Reyes giving her quiet guidance when he could, Clara didn't feel like a hero. Her hands were shaking, her mouth dry, and her eyes kept darting to the altitude indicator. They were losing height slowly, and the rate of descent was worrying. The small aircraft was heavy, and with one engine gone, it was struggling. The terrain below was changing too. Thick forests stretched in every direction, but ahead were mountains, sharp peaks, deep valleys, and no flat space to land. She had made the decision to aim for the highway. It was a risk, but it was all they had. Now she was thinking about the actual landing. She'd never landed a real plane outside a runway before. She'd only practiced emergency landings in simulators. Even those had terrified her. And back then, she had failed at it. But there was no one else. No second pilot. No instructor. Just her one working engine. And 11 lives behind her, depending on what she did next. Captain Reyes checked the systems again. Fuel's low. We've got maybe 15 minutes at most. Clara nodded. She could feel it too, the way the aircraft was getting harder to steer, the yoke needing more strength just to hold level. The flaps weren't responding smoothly either, in the highway she had chosen. It wasn't ideal, it curved slightly. There were traffic signs, overpasses, even trees too close to the edges. But it was long enough, barely on it was straight. For a short stretch, the controller on the radio said the police had cleared the area. That was all she had to work with. She took a deep breath and spoke into the headset. We're going for the landing. I'll need full focus. Help me monitor speed and flap response. I'm going to need everything we've got. Roger, Captain Reyes replied. His voice was stronger now, more confident. He trusted her. Clara started descending, not too fast. The worst thing would be to come in at the wrong angle and overshoot. If that happened, there was no second chance. The plane couldn't go around again. The left engine was weakening. It was coughing now and then, almost like it knew it had done enough. Down in the cabin, the passengers were bracing. The flight attendant had gone row by row, helping people get into the brace position. She didn't tell them that Clara, the quiet woman from seat 3A, was the one flying. She didn't have to. Everyone had guessed by now. Whispers moved through the rows like a breeze. She's flying the plane. She was a pilot before. She's saving us. One old man was praying. Softly, a mother held her child close, humming a song that was out of tune but full of comfort. The businessman across from them had tears in his eyes, holding his phone as if trying to send one last message. Though there was no signal, back in the cockpit, Clara was concentrating hard. She was scanning for visual landmarks. A river, a red barn, the curve in the road. She remembered these from the satellite images she had quickly seen on the small map screen earlier. She recognized the shape of the road. The landing spot was getting close. Captain Reyes looked at her. You sure you want to do this? No, she said honestly, but we have no other choice. The approach began. Clara lowered the flaps. Slightly, even though they moved sluggishly. The plane tilted forward more steeply. She adjusted pitch and throttle carefully, remembering every word her instructor had ever said to her. Gentle hands. Feel the air. Trust the wings. But the wings weren't in perfect shape. One was scorched. The airflow wasn't smooth. The right side dipped harder than the left. She had to correct constantly. Every moment was a fight with the aircraft. The highway was coming into view now. It looked even narrower than it had on the map. Trees lined both sides. A few cars had pulled over far away, and flashing lights showed where police had cleared a small section. There were still obstacles, signs, lampposts, even a wire fence on one side. We're too fast, Clara muttered. She pulled back slightly. Easing the throttle, the engine made a terrible grinding sound, but obeyed. The plane slowed just enough. She looked at the speed too high to land safely, too low to stay in the air for much longer. The wind shifted. The plane jerked sideways. Clara's heart jumped. She pushed the rudder, corrected quickly, and fought the yoke. One mistake, and they'd crash into the trees. She couldn't let that happen. Gear down, she said. Captain Reyes flipped the switch. The wheels dropped into place with a loud creak. A green light blinked 2 wheels down, but the third wasn't locking. Front gears not confirmed. He said. Clara cursed under her breath. Belly landing was risky, but they had to keep going. Forget it. We're doing this, she said, more to herself than him. The nose dipped. The road was right there now. Trees whipped past. Clara braced. Herself, eyes fixed on the pavement, she spoke loudly, brace for landing. Inside the cabin, people screamed. The flight attendant held onto the jump seat and shouted, "Brace, brace, brace." Clara touched down. The rear wheels hit first with a screech. The plane bounced. She kept her hands steady. It came down again, this time harder. Then the front of the plane slammed into the road. The gear hadn't locked. The nose scraped the pavement, throwing sparks. Metal screamed. The cockpit shook. The windshield cracked. Slightly. Clara fought the yoke, keeping it centered. The wing clipped a traffic sign. The plane tilted slightly, but didn't tip. Brakes, she pressed them gently. Too hard, and they'd spin. Too soft, and they'd crash into the woods at the end of the road. Plane skidded. Sparks flew again. People screamed in the cabin, but the plane slowed, inch by inch, yard by yard, until dash silence. They stopped. The plane sat still on the highway, smoke rising from the engine, one wing torn, the tires blown. But upright. In one piece, Clara didn't move. Captain Reyes let out a long breath. "You did it." Clara blinked as if waking up from a dream. "We're alive?" He nodded. Yes. Tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years, not since the day she had quit flight school. But now, they came, soft and steady. Outside, emergency workers were rushing toward them. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars. Red and blue lights flashed. People were yelling. Inside the cabin, applause broke out. Passengers were clapping, crying, shouting thanks. Some had fallen to their knees. Others just stared ahead, stunned. The flight attendant stood up slowly, looked toward the cockpit, and whispered, "She saved us." Clara finally let go of the yoke. Her fingers were stiff, frozen in place. She opened the cockpit door and stepped out. The passengers looked at her like she was someone else, someone powerful, someone brave. No one said a word at first. Then a child clapped again, louder this time. Others joined in. Someone shouted. She flew the plane. And the applause grew. The flight attendant hugged her. "You're a miracle." Clara shook her head. "I just remembered what to do." But they didn't care. To them, she was a hero. Outside, news crews were already gathering. The emergency landing had been seen by people nearby. Some had filmed it. Videos were spreading online. Police officers shook Clara's hand. Medics tried to check her, but she waved them off to help the injured co-pilot instead. Captain Reyes walked up behind her. "I've flown over 1,000 times. I've never seen anything like that." Clara smiled through tears. "I never thought I'd fly again." "You just saved 12 lives," he said. "You're more of a pilot than most people I've ever met." And with that, he handed her the captain's hat. She held it for a second, unsure, then placed it gently on the dashboard of the plane. Not to take credit, but as a quiet goodbye to the fear that had chased her for years. That night, as the sun set behind the trees, Clara sat on the hood of an ambulance, watching the sky. She didn't feel like the woman from Seat 3A anymore. She had flown, she had landed, and she had done what no one expected. She had become a pilot again without even meaning to. The moment the plane came to a complete stop on that highway, the world around Clara Jennings seemed frozen. For a few long seconds, everything was silent. No voices, no engine noise. Just the hum of wind outside and the distant sound of sirens approaching. Her hands were still tightly wrapped around the yoke, knuckles white, body locked in a tight position. She'd been holding on for so long, pushing every part of her body and mind to keep the aircraft steady. Now it was over, but her brain didn't understand that. Yet Captain Reyes looked over at her with tired eyes. He gave a weak smile and said softly, "You just did the impossible." Clara slowly turned her head toward him. Her heart was still thumping inside her chest like it was trying to escape. Her mouth was dry. Her arms were numb from gripping the controls too tightly. But deep in her chest, where her old love for flying used to live, something stirred like a flame that had been out for a long time, but just got reignited. She nodded, still unsure of what to say. Her eyes looked through the cracked windshield. There were emergency lights flashing everywhere now. red and blue. Ambulances, fire trucks, police cruisers, people running toward the plane, flashing cameras. A man was shouting into a radio, giving orders. Another was waving for the paramedics to hurry. The landing had drawn a crowd. Not just officials, but drivers who had been stopped on the highway, bystanders from nearby farms, even a news van that had somehow made it there already. Inside the plane, the passengers were beginning to move again. Some were crying, some were laughing through tears. Some were just stunned and silent. The flight attendant unbuckled herself and moved carefully through the aisle, checking on people one by one. She kept glancing toward the cockpit door, like she couldn't believe what had just happened in there. Clara finally let go of the yoke. Her fingers hurt. She looked down and saw small cuts from where her nails had dug into her own skin. Legs shook slightly as she stood up. The captain gently touched her arm. "You saved us all," he said again. "I didn't do it alone." She replied, but deep down she knew this had been her moment. Her hands, her decisions, her training, her courage. She had done what even she didn't believe she could do. She stepped out of the cockpit, and every passenger turned their head toward her. For a moment, nobody said anything. They just stared. It was as if they were trying to understand how the quiet woman from seat 3A, who had looked like just another business travel, had just landed a burning plane. Then, slowly, people began clapping. One person stood, then another.
Ow.
Someone called, "Out! Thank you!" Another shouted, "You're a hero!" And then more applause followed. Clara felt overwhelmed. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to people looking at her like she was someone special. She had spent years hiding from flying, hiding from who she used to be. Now she was standing in the aisle of a broken plane, surrounded by people who were alive because of her. The flight attendant walked up to her and wrapped her arms around her. It was a tight, grateful hug. "You were amazing," she whispered. "I've never seen anything like that, ever." Clara smiled, her eyes beginning to water. She wanted to say something clever or brave, but all she could do was nod. Her voice, it wasn't ready yet. Her heart was still catching up with what her body had done. Outside, emergency workers opened the door and placed the stairs. One by one, the passengers began to exit the plane. Some limped, some had cuts and bruises, but none were seriously injured. Clara waited near the door to make sure everyone was getting out safely. As they passed, many of them stopped to touch her shoulder or shake her hand. One older woman held her face gently and said, "You're an angel." Another man handed her a crumpled note that simply read, "You gave me another chance to see my daughter again. Thank you." The child who had been crying during the flight gave her a tiny stuffed bear. "For you," he said shyly.
"Oh, you're the pilot now?"
Clara couldn't hold back the tears anymore. She hugged the little boy and whispered, "Thank you." As the last passenger stepped down the stairs, Captain Reyes turned to her and said, "Let's go meet the world." They stepped out into the sunlight together, and the world was waiting. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted questions, microphones pointed in her direction. "Ma'am, were you the one flying? Are you a trained pilot? What's your name? How did you do it? Was it a miracle?" She didn't answer. She was still trying to breathe, still trying to feel the ground under her feet. A paramedic tried to lead her to an ambulance, but she waved them off. "Check the others first," she said. Her eyes scanned the scene. The co-pilot had been taken out on a stretcher but was alive and talking. The injured passengers were receiving help. No one was dead. No one was missing. That fact alone was too big to understand in that moment. Then came the police officer, tall man with a calm voice and a notebook. "Miss Jennings, is it?" he asked. She nodded. "Can you tell me what happened?" Clara looked at him, then looked at the plane behind her. Its wing was burnt, its tires shredded. It looked like something pulled out of a movie scene, but it was real, so she told him. Hey, explained everything. How the engine had caught fire. How the co-pilot got injured? It's how she used her old flight training to help. How Captain Reyes gave her a chance. How she remembered just enough to keep the plane in the air. The officer listened, scribbled notes, nodded often. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "You're going to be famous?" Clara frowned. I don't want to be. You don't have a choice, he said kindly. People are calling you the passenger pilot. Your video is already online. It's everywhere. Video. He pointed to one of the bystanders. Someone filmed you landing the plane from the road. It's gone viral. Everyone's talking about it. Clara's heart skipped. She didn't know whether to laugh or panic. She hadn't thought about the outside world. She had only been trying to survive, but now the story was out. She was the center of it. A few hours later, she was sitting in a quiet room inside a nearby hospital, being treated for exhaustion and minor cuts. Reporters were waiting outside. People were already trying to send flowers. A news anchor wanted her on live television that evening. Captain Reyes came in with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat down across from her. You really didn't. Think you'd fly again, huh? Clara shook her head. Not even once. I left that life behind. Maybe, he said. They sat in silence for a while. Then he said something that made her sit up straighter. I talked to the airline, he said. And the FAA? They want to talk to you. They're impressed. They're shocked. They're also curious. Clara blinked. Curious. Nodded. You flew a damaged plane with 1 engine, failing systems, and no recent experience. And you landed it on a highway with 0 deaths. That doesn't happen. Not even trained pilots pull that off. She didn't know what to say, they think. You should come back, he continued. Finish what you started. Get certified. You've got a gift. Saw it. We all saw it. Clara looked down at the cup in her hands. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark surface of the coffee. Could she really go back? Was she ready to face that part of herself again? I'm not sure I can, she said quietly. Reyes smiled. You already did. That night. She went online and saw herself on every major news site. Her photo, taken as she stepped off the plane, eyes wide and wind in her hair, was everywhere. Headlines read, Passenger becomes pilot in midair, emergency miracle landing by untrained. Woman saves 12, the passenger who flew a plane. She watched the video shaky footage from a cell phone. It showed the small plane wobbling in the air, sparks flying, wing damaged. No. Then it touched down, bounced and rolled to a stop. People in the background screamed, then cheered. She watched herself step out, and for the first time she believed. She had done it. She had flown, and no one, not even herself, could take that away from her again.